Hi, I'm Beatrice Setnik, Chief Scientific Officer at Altasciences. Welcome to our poster titled Navigating the Unchartered Territory of Assessing Psychedelics in Human Abuse Potential Studies. I'd like to thank my co-authors who are a representation of various pharmaceutical companies and academia that belong to the International Society for CNS Clinical Trials and Methodology. We have several working groups where we address different evolving methods for CNS clinical trials and drug development. One of the areas that is uncharted and still has questions regarding methodology is the assessment of abuse potential in clinical trials of psychedelics. Now, the FDA has published a guidance on this topic back in 2017. However, this was prior to the abundance of research that started with psychedelics since then. And therefore, because psychedelics have unique properties that don't necessarily have similarities to things like opioids with very strong reinforcing effects, their abuse in the real world is quite different in terms of the patterns, and therefore adaptations need to be considered when evaluating their abuse potential. Now, we know that for most of the classic psychedelics, human abuse potential studies may not be necessary for NDA filings if there's sufficient data in the literature. However, for any analogs or drugs that are less well characterized in the existing literature, these studies will be required as part of the FDA requirements. Therefore, tackling the types of methodological approaches will be very important. We are looking at several modifications that we need to consider for such studies. In fact, Figure 1 gives you a rundown of the typical abuse potential requirements for psychedelics and whether or not the decision will be made as to whether or not the abuse potential study will be required. Certainly for prodrugs, novel drugs, and drugs without enough sufficient data in the literature, these studies will require some sort of an adapted human abuse potential study design. Figure 2 illustrates some of the adaptations that may be considered. You'll notice the two different color schematics with the classic versus modified human abuse potential study design. So typically, a human abuse potential study will have a screening, qualification phase, and a treatment phase. Both the qualification and treatment phase are double-blind and randomized. You'll notice that placebos and positive controls are a staple part of both the qualification and treatment phases. The qualification phase is in these studies for the purpose of identifying eligible subjects. They are pharmacologically qualified based on their ability to differentiate a scheduled positive control versus placebo. Only subjects that are able to do that on the pharmacodynamic measures, including the primary pharmacodynamic endpoint, which is the drug liking visual analog scale, meaning how much do they like the drug, are they able to, if they can differentiate between the active control and placebo, then they're qualified to continue into the treatment phase of the trial. So the qualification criteria is that these subjects are typically experienced recreational drug users. They're not physically dependent on the drugs, but they have experience with non-medical use of the drug of the positive control that's being studied. When we look at some of the modifications that we may consider, given the fact that there has been a lot of discussion about functional unblinding with psychedelics, we may consider some adaptations to these studies, including perhaps a secondary positive control, which may be something like a lower dose of the positive control or some other drug that has similar pharmacological properties that may throw more confusion into the blinding schematic and make it a little less obvious for blinding purposes. We may also look at, of course, including the facilitators in the study designs as recommended in the FDA guidances on psychedelic drugs. So this involves also the safety preparation sessions, which may be required in collaboration with the safety monitors to may have the subjects comfortable with the clinic environment, and throughout the treatment phases and qualification phases, where you have safety monitors and facilitators that oversee and assist the subjects during their exposure to the investigational study drugs. There are also other adaptations that we may consider, including having additional measurements or different endpoints that can further characterize the unique attributes of the psychedelic drugs. Something beneficial may include an exit interview that asks about their overall experience and what about the experience would or wouldn't prompt them to take the drug again. We may also think about having expanded testing windows. Whereas traditional human abuse potential studies assay out to 24 hours post-dose, we know that there may be some longer effects of psychedelics, and therefore having assessments further out than that 24-hour time period may be beneficial. So there are further details of this poster of some of the types of recommendations that our group has recommended and continues to discuss at our ISCTM working group meetings. We welcome you to join our ICTM working group, and if you have any questions about this poster or any of the human abuse potential study work that we do at Altasciences, please feel free to reach out. Thank you.